Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1126 gives us some major updates on 3 out of 4 Emperor crews, and looking closely actually tells us a lot about what is in store for each of them as we head into the Elbaf arc. Now there's so much to cover in this chapter that I want to get right into it, but first things first, we get our 14th entry in the Ogre Child Yamato's Golden Harvest Surrogate Pilgrimage cover story as we find Yamato stopping for soba at a small shop in Kuri. Of note, this shop should not be confused with Sanji's soba stand that he set up in the Flower Capital during the Wano arc. We learned that more Kuri residents have gone missing here, likely the same work of the kidnapper that we saw several chapters ago. The woman serving Yamato here is actually Osome, the woman who Sanji saved from Queen during the raid on Onigashima. Interestingly, she was shown earlier in this cover story as well, with her pet mouse Chuji in hand as they waved farewell to Yamato from the Flower Capital. There she had a new outfit, but here we see her appearance resemble the outfit she wore on her debut. There's really not too much to say here with this one as we continue to get more and more victims for what seems like the primary conflict of this cover story. Things are gearing up, so hopefully we'll start getting into the more interesting portions soon enough. That said, let's get into chapter 1126, Settling the Score. We pick back up revisiting the Straw Hats and the Giant Warrior Pirates as they sail toward Elbaf and finally get the explanation for why Dory and Brogy paused their duel. Oimo and Kashi explain that after the events of Enies Lobby, they decided to seek out their captains on Little Garden. Now back during the brief Where Are They Now cover story, we learned that Oimo and Kashi were leaving Water 7 and heading for Elbaf, so now it seems that they actually decided to take a detour to Little Garden first. They explained to the Straw Hats that they had continued their duel with their fists after their weapons broke at the end of the Little Garden arc, as we've seen them do in several cover stories since. It seems the two of them were convinced to head back to Elbaf in order to acquire new weapons so that they could finish their fight properly. Weapons that we've of course seen on display throughout this arc. All of this still doesn't make much sense to Nami, who classically did not understand it back on Little Garden either. Now across these pages, we get another group shot of the Giants featuring Dory, Brogy, Oimo, and Kashi at the center, but surrounding them are several familiar yet unnamed faces. All the way to the right behind Kashi is the Giant with antlers on his helmet, who we first saw attacking the Marine fleet on Egghead. Many of these Giants were first shown during that spread, including the long-nosed Giant below Kashi with the oversized helmet, the rotund one with the obscured eyes and mustache, and the one with the unruly beard and necklace, though we first saw him all the way back when the Giant Warrior Pirates first arrived. All the way to the left behind Oimo is the Giant we initially saw holding 2 large pistols or cannons against the Marines. Of note, however, there are 2 fairly new designs in the foreground, with the bald tattooed Giant and the Giant with the humongous chin. We have seen a bald Giant among the crew before, but they've never been shown at an angle to depict the tattoo we see here. Though largely generic in design, there is quite a lot of attention to detail placed on these two, and I'm interested in seeing more of them. I'll actually speculate a little bit more on these 2 Giants in just a bit. We get a montage of the crew enjoying themselves on their way to Elbaf and get a few more designs. The mustached Giant with the braids imitating Frankie's pose was also first shown in that spread of the Giant Warrior Pirates attacking the Marine fleet. The Giant enjoying Brook's music looks to be the long-haired Giant who shot an arrow against the Marines, and the gruff Giant with the mustache and beard imitating the Nika pose with Luffy is a fairly new design, albeit a bit more generic with this group. Though we did see a Giant with similar features on Elbaf back during Big Mom's flashback. It's always nice seeing the crew get to relax and celebrate, and I particularly love that Oda drew Sanji and Usopp in this pose that we first saw all the way back during the crew's journey into the Grand Line through Reverse Mountain. While all of this is going on, we also get to check in on Bonnie and Kuma as they finally get to travel the seas together and see the horizon, just as they had promised each other back during Kuma's flashback. Recall that Kuma is not actually dead, but rather in a vegetative state. We still need to find out just what it is about the Buccaneers that is allowing Kuma to function despite this. Since Kuma's return to the story, Oda has depicted his expression very subtly, allowing for the interpretation that he's emoting in some panels, such as the one that we see in this chapter, where you can sort of make out a smile upon his face. I'm really excited to see us revisit this plot thread, and with the Vegapunk still being alive to disclose more information about the Buccaneers to us, it feels even closer than ever. Now, jumping back a bit, there's one more Giant we see in this chapter, and that's the dark-haired Giant with the mustache, who we've seen throughout the Egghead arc. He was most prominently shown during that spread of the Giants attacking the Marine ships, but we actually first saw him in this arc back when Dory and Brogy were approaching the center of the island. And going even further back, he looks to be the same Giant that was flexing behind Dory and Brogy during that brief flashback on Little Garden all of those years ago. He mentions that the alcohol they're drinking is absinthe, which is a very strong green-colored spirit that historically has been associated with hallucinations. While there is not really any scientific basis for it, the drink has come to be associated with a green fairy that people claim to have seen after its consumption. The reality is that the drink's high alcohol content is likely what causes people to feel as if they're hallucinating, but in a fantastical story such as One Piece, it's possible there's more to it, and as such, the giant warns the crew about this possibility. And it seems that this warning was apt, as by the end of the chapter, we find the Straw Hats in a state of total confusion. 2 days have passed since the crew set sail from Egghead, and they've yet to arrive at their destination. As we know, the newspaper that would be distributed on the second day of Egghead would inform the world of the Straw Hats' presence on Egghead, and that information is what had prompted the giant warrior pirates to make their way to the government island. As such, we know that the distance between Egghead and Elbaf was close enough that the giant warrior pirates were able to traverse it in less than a day, so it having already been 2 days doesn't quite add up. As a real quick sidebar, we also get the name of the giant's ship revealed for the first time in the manga proper. We've known from data books that one of their ships used by the giants that we saw during the flashback on Little Garden was called the Great Eric, and it would seem the one that they've used to set sail to Egghead is the very same one. Not only that, but it seems that half the crew is missing alongside the Sunny. The remaining half of the crew wonder if they've all been passed out drunk this whole time, while Robin, in classic Robin fashion, ponders a grim fate for the rest of the Straw Hats. Of note, we know we are approaching the coast of Elbaf given the size of the fish and the surrounding waters, as first seen during Big Mom's flashback and later noted by the Kid Pirates during the Egghead arc. Elsewhere, the chapter closes with a voice calling out to Nami as she finds herself in an incredibly strange setting, one that looks to be made out of children's building blocks, or Legos. There's a lot to discuss with this, so let's just get right into it. Given Nami's clothing here, I believe this part of the crew has already been taken to Elbaf. Her appearance is very reminiscent of Viking-inspired clothing, as we've seen Oda draw throughout the years, and is notably similar to the outfit worn by the new giant warrior pirate, Gerd, with a V-cut blouse and the furred leg warmers. Now, as for the location that she's in, this is a little more of a stretch, but I would not be surprised at all if Oda is drawing inspiration from all parts of the Viking Scandinavian origin and creating a setting that features building blocks akin to Legos, which of course were created in Denmark. It's to be seen, however, if this hallway that Nami finds herself in is an actual setting on Elbaf, or if this is some sort of toy castle. With Elbaf being a nation of giants, it would follow that their toy building blocks would be perfectly in scale with normal-sized humans. Perhaps this is not even somewhere on Elbaf just yet, but rather some sort of Lego dollhouse that the Straw Hats are being transported in. Now, whatever it is, who would do such a thing? Well, we've speculated before on the channel what kind of conflict our heroes will find themselves in on Elbaf, especially since the giants seem to worship Nika, the sun god. Just a few chapters ago, I wondered if the giant warrior pirates were being ordered to bring the Straw Hats back for some nefarious purpose unknown to Dory and Brokey. They may think they're simply saving their friends, while someone like Prince Loki has some more devious intentions. When we first heard of Loki, it was with the context of seeking out Big Mom's daughter, Lola, as a bride. So perhaps we're finding Nami now in a similar situation, where Loki has set his eyes on her and has ordered her to be taken to him behind the giant's back. Who knows? Maybe the voice calling out to her isn't even one of the Straw Hats, but rather the prince himself. And perhaps Loki has a childlike nature, which would go hand in hand with the Lego-like setting that we find Nami in. Calling back to that dark-haired giant's warnings about absinthe, I suppose there is some chance that Nami has found herself in some sort of hallucination, though it would seem that the giant pirates and the other Straw Hats were also affected by their drinks and passed out. It feels to me that there is some foul play going on, as we know the Straw Hats like Nami and Zoro have fairly high alcohol tolerances, as seen during the Whiskey Peak arc and the Volume 106 SBS. As such, I don't think the crew merely passed out from drinking too much absinthe. Don't get me wrong, it has a very high alcoholic content and is definitely dangerous to drink at volume, but to cause even giants to pass out for 2 days seems highly suspicious, especially since the giants seem to drink this stuff pretty regularly. Instead, I imagine someone tampered with their drinks. As we've seen before during the Little Garden arc, it is no easy feat to take down giants physically, but their internal organs are still vulnerable. Back then, we saw Baroque Works spike Dory's ale with explosives, whereas here, we could be seeing some sort of knockout drug at play. Neither Dory nor Brogey suspected each other of tampering with each other's drinks, since proud warriors of Elbaf would not need to resort to such deception, which shows that the giant warrior pirates would still be susceptible to such a trick. Bringing Loki back into play for a second, it would follow that a prince like him would not necessarily grow up living the life of a proud warrior, and as such, would be more than happy to employ such a ruse even against his own kind. He could have sent some giants under his influence along with the giant warrior pirates. Perhaps these new faces that we saw earlier in the foreground that have so much focus on them could have been involved in this plot. Or maybe it came from the kitchen and the cook is the culprit. Of course, whoever is behind this doesn't necessarily have to be Loki or some of the giants. After all, we still have that silhouetted figure from a few chapters ago to account for. Whoever it is, I'm wondering if there may be some internal dispute between the warrior class of Elbaf and the royals. We'll just have to see. Real quick, maybe the Straw Hats aren't even what the devious faction of giants is seeking. The line at the end about not being able to go back to Elbaf without the Straw Hats ship is pretty interesting. Who knows, maybe it's not even the crew that's important to the giants as much as it is the ship itself, with it being made of atom wood. Frankie explained that this wood comes from a tree known as the jewel tree Atom, known as the strongest tree in the world, and it exists on a war-torn island. This description lines up very well with what we know of the island Elbaf exists on, Warland. Elbaf is just the name of the kingdom or nation that exists there, but the greater area is known as Warland. It being a nation of warriors with a giant tree-like figure at the center makes it a solid candidate for being the home of the jewel tree Atom. Perhaps the giants wish to reclaim the stolen wood from the Straw Hat ship, since after all, Frankie acquired it from the black market illegally. Maybe there's even more at play here, with Frankie's bounty poster featuring an image of the Sunny. Lots of interesting possibilities going on. One last thing of note, it seems that the crew has been split up based on either age or tenure. The only ones remaining on the giant ship are both the oldest half of the crew, as well as the half to have joined the most recently. With them is of course Bonnie and Lilith, who I'm sure some people wish to join the crew, but that's a whole different discussion. Lilith looks to be so dazed that she's staring blankly at a wall, but Bonnie's presence is a bit more interesting, as I have to wonder if she was also passed out for 2 days. With her only being a child, we did see her toasting along with the rest of the gang, but she may not have consumed any of the absinthe and may have actually been awake this whole time, though she probably has been portrayed drinking alcohol in the series before. As a sidebar, it's pretty adorable seeing her holding on to Jinbei here, as she's come to let down her hardened pirate captain exterior and is finally able to be as a child once again now that she's been reunited with her father. Speaking of, Kuma could have also seen what had happened, as he would not be consuming anything either due to his condition. Who knows, despite him being immobile, maybe he was taken alongside the rest of the Straw Hats. There's some really interesting possibilities here with these two. Overall, I am really excited that we're getting a new adventure once again. I had some apprehension that at this stage in the story, with every arc being so impactful to the narrative at large, we wouldn't be able to fit any time in for true classic adventures like we had in the years past, but this development definitely calms my concerns. I'm also looking forward to the crew being split up a bit, as it will really help us focus on certain characters and see their dynamics. Having the adults split up from the kids, who may be entering a LEGO-inspired setting, has a lot of fun possibilities. Also of note, the missing group of Straw Hats is also the same group that said goodbye to Vivi at the end of the Alabasta arc, and we've been waiting for her to come back into play and reunite with the Straw Hats at some point. So hey, maybe we're setting that up here as well. And while on this topic, I should note that some of the outfits that we see the crew wear look to be reminiscent of their pre-timeskip outfits, especially with Usopp, who may just be wearing the same outfit he had pre-timeskip underneath that jacket. Perhaps Oda is really playing into the nostalgia of the first half of the series. We'll just have to see. Now, I've spent a ton of time going through all these possibilities with the Straw Hats, but there's still even more exciting things in this chapters, so let's get into it. This chapter also addresses the ever-looming conflict between the Barto Club and the red-haired pirates. We learn in this chapter that the island that Bartolomeo attacked back during the Grand Fleet cover story was named Gartel Island, and the events of that cover story took place over a month ago. In the cover story, Bartolomeo came upon Shanks' territory and burned his flag, claiming the island for the Straw Hats. A few weeks ago, during the tail end of the Wano arc, we saw that the red-haired pirates had become aware of this incident. Since so much time had passed since this scene, I had thought they had already handled Bartolomeo by now, especially since we saw them resting on Elbaf just a few days ago. In hindsight, it turns out that they had been in a hurry to set sail toward Gartel for this very reason. It's still a bit strange to me that Bartolomeo had just stayed on this island for over a month, especially since we presume the Grand Fleet would have at least been aware of Luffy's status over the course of that time, but that's besides the point. We find the red-haired pirates having beaten Bartolomeo to his knees, as Shanks explains the severity of Bartolomeo's actions. We've seen throughout the series just how serious Shanks gets when it comes to his friends being endangered, and more recently have seen that he largely maintains alliances with weaker crews in order to protect them. And we've also seen just how much respect Luffy puts on pirate flags and what they represent, making you wonder if he would have condoned Bartolomeo's actions in the first place. Among the crowd, we have a bunch of familiar faces. Starting with the red-haired pirates, we of course have Ben Beckman and Lucky Roo, as well as Hongo and what looks to be Bonk Punch in the back with the bald head. This large hulking figure that's obscured by the speech balloon is likely either Gab or Building Snake, but I'm leaning toward the former given his dark shirt, combat boots, and pants. Over on Bartolomeo's side, we have the one named crewmate of the Barto Club, Gambia, but we've actually seen these other crewmates before. In the back is a large man with a backwards baseball cap that also appears throughout this scene, who we first saw with the crew when they were on their way to Zoe. In front of him here is a man with a strange comb-over hairstyle that also debuted during that trip to Zoe, and we see him in full besides Gambia a bit later. Over here looks to be the man with the striped shirt and mohawk that debuted during that Zoe sequence, and we also see him a few times throughout this scene, crying over Bartolomeo. There is one last figure on Bartolomeo's side that doesn't really get focused on in the rest of the chapter, but his balding hairstyle looks to be similar to this one guy on the bottom of this panel that we first saw during their trip to Zoe. Watching in the background are also the townsfolk of Gartel, including what we assume is the town leader or mayor. Beside him is one of the older folk of the village that we saw during the cover story, with what looks to be one of the women who watched Bartolomeo burn Shanks' flag. The larger man with the anchor tattoo was the guy who Bartolomeo beat up when he first arrived, and you can spot the guy we saw in that cover story with the gun beside him here. While Bartolomeo begs for forgiveness, Hongo approaches and hands him a vial of poison. Hongo was first seen all the way back in chapter 1 when all of the red hair pirates had slightly different designs, and appropriately is the doctor of the crew. Interestingly, he instructs Bartolomeo to feed the poison to Luffy, to which Bartolomeo obviously declines by taking the poison for himself. He pledges himself to Luffy and reasons that there's no reason Luffy should have to suffer for Bartolomeo's own actions and decides to die in his stead. But of course, we come to the immediate realization that the poison was a dud. Given Shanks' cheerful reaction afterwards, it seems that Shanks had no intention of actually killing Luffy, but instead was either using this as an opportunity to test Bartolomeo's loyalty to him, or simply putting on a display of force by making it seem like he was retaliating for Bartolomeo's actions. It should be noted that even if the poison were real, it likely would have no effect on Luffy due to his built-up immunity over the years. Anyways, it seems there was still a price to pay for the Barto Club as Yasopp enters and blows up the Mr. Luffy Go with a single shot from its rifle. It's not totally clear if this was always in the plans or if Yasopp took this upon himself, but in either case, it's pretty remarkable that he was able to do this with a single bullet from a rifle. We'd been told before how accurate of a marksman Yasopp was, but this is our first time really seeing his destructive power. Perhaps there's some hockey involved here, but whatever it is, showing off Yasopp's capabilities just before we enter an arc that many hope will be focused around improving Usopp's skills seems somewhat intentional by Oda, or I can only hope. We also get some narration that is evocative of Kid and Law's defeat at the hands of emperors, and to me, this really cements the eventual conflict between Shanks and Luffy. We've known for years now that Luffy planned on taking down all of the emperors, but with Bartolomeo's defeat at the hands of the Red Hair Pirates, we are finally pressing the issue. It'll be interesting to see where Shanks goes from here. He declared his ambition to claim the One Piece at the end of the Wano arc, and has presumably been taking the steps toward that goal. If we look at all of his actions since then, maybe we can get a better idea of his plans. Before dealing with Bartolomeo, he took a pit stop at Elbaf and seemingly met up with an old friend or friends who Shanks thought to have been dead. At face value, we took this to mean Dory and Brogy, since those two were characters reintroduced immediately after, but it's still not entirely clear if that was the intent behind this line. Either way, it seems he is friendly enough with the Elbaf Giants to enlist their help against an enemy like Eustace Kid. Big Mom believed that with the power of the Giants at her disposal, she could have been Pirate King, so it's interesting that Shanks opted to stop at Elbaf immediately after declaring his goal to get the One Piece, and from there, he decided to handle the Bartolomeo situation, which effectively begins a conflict with Luffy. Maybe we can start to see the dots connecting here as Shanks makes his move toward the poneglyphs he doesn't have. Who knows, maybe Shanks is somehow involved in the current situation with the Straw Hats, having helped set all of this up. It's to be seen just how adversarial Shanks is intended to be. We keep seeing him have sinister moments that get undercut by scenes of him smiling over Luffy's progress, so we'll just have to see, I guess. Real quick, there are also some fun theories involving Shanks poisoning Roger after this chapter, but I think we'll need to see some more from Shanks before jumping to such nefarious conclusions. That said, let's talk about some real evil pirates, as the other third of this chapter gives us an update on the Blackbeard pirates. Over on Fololed, Blackbeard has finally returned to the island after having been at sea the past several chapters. As for the island itself, you'll notice it's patched up from the damage it took during the skirmish with Garp and Sword during the Egghead arc. The crack down the middle of the skull is fixed together, but underneath the eyes what looks to be a large band-aid. It's not clear if this is an actual means of repairing the island, or the result of Pizarro's animation of it. Despite his hopes of not being yelled at during the day prior, we find Pizarro being blamed for all of the trouble while Blackbeard was gone. Since he effectively has the ability to control and surveil the island with his devil fruit powers, but failed to keep things in order. Pizarro was also pretty keen on taking credit for their victory over Garp and the Marines, and in the past has shown the desire to lead the pirate crew himself, so it's only fitting that he gets pinned for everything that went down. As such, Blackbeard is furious that the two high-profile prisoners such as Kobe and Moria were allowed to escape. While all of this is going on, we see San Juan Wolf clumsily restore the buildings of the island after they were moved around by Kujaku's whip fruit. It seems that despite the toll on the island from yesterday's clash, morale is higher than ever across the pirates, with them rooting for Blackbeard's ascension to Pirate King, not unlike what we saw with Buggy's men a few chapters ago. Speaking of which, Crossguild is the only Emperor crew who we don't focus on in this chapter, so I'm hoping to get more from them soon. But back to Full of Lead, Blackbeard finally gets the update that they've captured Garp, which is a pretty solid reward all things considered. Recall that their original plan was to use Kobe as a bargaining chip for Blackbeard's plans to have Full of Lead become a world government recognized kingdom, and as suspected, Garp is even better leverage. We also get a hard confirmation that the Vice Admiral is still alive, as expected. There's only a brief shadowy shot of him in this chapter, but his status is now very reminiscent of Ace before Marineford, having been captured by Blackbeard and turned into the world government, and this situation just feels like a riff on that whole thing. Kuzan mentions that he believed he went for the kill, which could be the truth, but could also equally be a means to make it seem to Blackbeard that he actually went all out. It's still not completely clear what Kuzan's motivations are as a Blackbeard pirate, and we continue to get ambiguous dialogue that could suggest his betrayal. The composition of this panel is also quite interesting, with all of the Blackbeard pirates depicted facing us, the reader, while Kuzan and Shiryu, the two former government assets, have their backs turned to us, and while you can still make out Shiryu's profile, Kuzan's face is fully hidden. Blackbeard then interestingly makes a call to Lafitte, who we actually haven't seen in real time in almost a decade. While we did see him during a flashback to the time skip during the Egghead arc, the last time that we saw him in the present day was all the way back after the Dressrosa arc, when he and Shiryu went to pick up Burgess from Dressrosa. There, we learned that Burgess had actually stowed away on a Revolutionary Army ship and informed the Blackbeard pirates about the weapons and resources that they could acquire by attacking their HQ at Baltigo, which actually provides some very interesting context for Lafitte's presence here at what we see is the HQ of Umid Shipping. Recall that Umid is one of the underworld emperors that we first met during the Whole Cake Island arc and is known as a shipping magnate. We actually saw his influence during the Kuma flashback recently, as his boats were used to ship construction material to Egghead. Given that, I suppose it makes sense that the world government has used his services to ship food and supplies to Mary Joie, but as we learn from Lafitte here, things have not been going well. We learned in the Egghead arc that Revolutionary Army members across the world have been attacking cargo ships and preventing supply lines from reaching Mary Joie, but here we see that even when resources get through, they don't end up making their way up. We first saw the Bandolas unfold during the Reverie arc, and it was when Stelly was being transported up alongside Sabo, who was disguised as a guard of course, that we were told the Bandolas were fairly safe and had never popped before. However, if I were to guess, I would imagine that the Bandolas are breaking down because of Karasu's soot crows, since we have been shown that his crows can function and be used around the world no matter where he is. Now, Blackbeard tells Lafitte to start preparations, and it's not clear what exactly he means here. But given that Lafitte has been tasked with keeping an eye on the activities of both the Revolutionary Army and the status of Mary Joie, I can only imagine that there's another infiltration attempt at foot. After all, Lafitte did sneak into Mary Joie upon his debut without any trouble, and now that Devon has acquired the likeness of an elder, they may have more access than they initially thought they would, assuming the news of Saturn's demise has not yet made it out. There's also the possibility that Blackbeard is planning on interfering with the Revolutionary Army's siege and looking to solve that issue for the world government in order to put himself in a better position to get the kingdom that he desires, which would give him even more access to Mary Joie. Something like that would effectively make it so that he has picked fights with all three known members of the Monkey D family. Blackbeard also has Pudding now and Caribou alongside him, opening up a whole slew of possibilities with the ancient weapons and the poneglyphs, not to mention Pudding's devil fruit abilities to view and alter people's memories. Whatever it is that Blackbeard is gearing up to do, he's in quite the position. That's about it for everything I wanted to talk about in this chapter. So many fun possibilities to play for these three Emperor crews, so let me know what you're interested in the most and down in the comments. I for one am really looking forward to getting a proper adventure and a new mystery with the start of the Elbaf arc. As always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can get more of my breakdowns as soon as they come out. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.